Welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and my great partner, Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. You really have been across the globe this week. Every time I've seen you online, you've been here, there and everywhere.
Yeah, I just literally yesterday got back from 2 weeks in Australia, and I had an amazing time. I'll tell you about it sometime. But this evening, this harks back to another trip, which was to Canada, and where I met and heard talk the amazing Anna Stokke. So welcome to our podcast, Anna.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
It's so lovely to have you here. And Tom introduced me to your work, which I feel terribly guilty that I hadn't come across before, especially as I spent a lot of my early career in early maths education. But for those people who haven't been fortunate enough to kind of come across your work yet, could you give us a little overview of where you're from, what you do, and what your kind of areas of interest are?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. So I'm a mathematician. I have a PhD in math, and I'm a math professor at the University of Winnipeg in Canada. But the reason that people like you usually want to talk to me, if they do, is because of my work in math education. And so I'm a math education advocate, and I've been doing advocacy work for around 15 years. At one point, I founded an advocacy group to improve math instruction, advocate for improving math instruction across Canada. I founded and I run a nonprofit after-school program for kids in grades 4 to 6 so that they learn math after school. And the other thing I'm doing lately, for the last couple of years, I host a math education podcast called Chalk and Talk.
Yeah, and I've listened to, you've spoken to some really brilliant people, including quite recently Bruno Reddy, who I had the pleasure of meeting last week in Hobart in Tasmania. So
Nice.
It's great. We're spanning the globe here.
Yeah, he's great.
And I really want to get into this because I'm fascinated by them. When I went to see you in the Research Ed, the most recent Research Ed in Toronto, you were talking about more in a very general way research and bad research and applying it to some maths. And then I picked up on this whole thing about the maths wars or the math wars.
Right. Yeah.
And I was thinking, as someone who's interested in maths, I used to be a maths teacher as well. This idea of there being this big debate about, I feel like in my own practice, it's passed me by. I was thinking, what is this debate? Like, I've never had that debate in my own practice. We've just always done what I think is the things that you advocate. But could you summarize kind of what the kind of debate is? Like where is the territory for people having these quite big disagreements?
Oh, sure. Okay. So I guess first I would say generally, I'm actually not a big fan of the phrase math wars because I think it's sort of a distraction from the issue. The real issue here is kids are not learning math well, and teachers often don't know about how to teach math well. And it just sort of characterizes it as, there are these two opposing sides and like if they would just come together and whatnot. So that's the first thing I'd say. But generally speaking, I would say, and I've got a really great episode on this with Tom Lovelace, where we went through kind of the history, and I can really only speak to the way things are kind of in Canada and the US, I guess. So basically, it kind of started with the NCTM standards, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, that they came out with in 1989. And so those standards de-emphasize things like standard algorithms, doing pencil and paper mathematics. It's characterized as rote learning, memorizing your times tables, and basically things like that in favor of inventing your own strategies for doing math, kind of like a constructivist approach for doing math. And so I guess I would say, like, if we're talking about the math wars, kind of what happens is that there are the people that push back against that. And I'm one of those people. I think that definitely children need to learn standard algorithms, and those should be the main algorithms that they should learn in mathematics. They need to know their times tables. And, we need to teach math explicitly and sort of follow the instructional hierarchy, like work kids up to a point where they can do problem solving. Whereas you'll hear a lot of people will want to start with problem solving, right? So I think that kids need to get a really good foundation in the basics before they can get to that point where they do problem solving. So I hope that answered your question to some extent anyway.
So 1989, you say. So that's
Yeah,
like, so it's really lasted quite a long time then. There's some of the
absolutely.
permeated.
Yes, definitely.
And there are some specific. So I mean, I actually took a photo of it, so I'm looking at it here of the slide, which was this bad research claims bingo card, which I thought was
Oh,
a great way
did I
to.
make a bingo card with bad research claims? That kind of sounds like something I would do.
Yeah, you did. It was
I
very good. It
did.
was very.
Okay.
But
Okay, what's
I
on the
won't go
card?
through
What's
all
on
of
the
them
card?
because I mean, some of them are about maths and some aren't. But so here's one, and this for me is so interesting, which is that standard algorithms harm number sense. In other words, this
Yeah.
idea that if you just teach children how to do a kind of a procedure for multiplying numbers or something, or I mean, you could tell me some of the examples that actually harms their sense that they should, I don't know, not just learn the method, they should understand the method. But so
Sure.
that to me is, I mean, I've come across that specific case with a few teachers that you shouldn't teach that. But so let's explore that. What's the research around that? What's the kind of basis of that even debate coming about?
Right. Okay. So if you look into that, and so this is actually how I got involved in math education. So I'm so glad you're asking me this question. And basically it started when my daughter was in grade 3. And they had brought in a new curriculum in my province, a very radical curriculum. So literally teachers were not allowed to teach standard algorithms. Like my daughter, we taught her, and so when I say standard algorithms, I mean addition with a carry, I mean subtraction with a borrow, the traditional long division, those, okay? So literally my daughter, like we taught her these at home, and she would have like a little notebook and she would do it under her desk because they weren't allowed to use them. That's how ridiculous it was. And I went to this parent night. And so basically, this was all about how, this is why we're doing it this way. And so basically, they break the number up horizontally, and this can become quite cumbersome. Or they would do things like use blocks, like base 10 blocks and things like that to figure it out. They were using these as actual computational techniques. And basically, they told us this is because standard algorithms are harmful, and research has shown this. And we were given a research paper. The parents in that room were given a research paper. And that research paper consisted of, it was a case study on like 2 kids who had learning disabilities. And in addition to that, it was just flawed, right? But if you look into this, there's an article by Constance Camille, and that's where most of it comes from. And I think it's called The Harmful Effects of Standard Algorithms or something like that. And actually, I've gone through that really carefully. And I went through it on one of my podcasts where we just took it apart. Like it's completely flawed article. But what happens is there might be a flawed article like that, right? And then education academics pick it up and people keep citing it and it becomes established research. Like this is what the research says on this topic. When in fact, the original study is completely flawed. It does not show that at all. There literally is no evidence that standard algorithms are harmful. And common sense goes against this,
Mm.
right? Okay, look, like how could they go against number sense? If you teach this properly, okay, so I don't know, say you have 35 plus 56, okay? We line these up because of our wonderful place value system, right? You have 5 ones and you have 6 ones. That's 11 ones, right? That's 110 and 1 1. How could this work against number sense? They're basically designed to use the place value system and number sense, right? So there is no evidence showing that any of this is true, but it's actually commonplace that people say things like this, that you have to delay the algorithm, that standard algorithms are going to harm number sense. So I kind of went on a tangent there, but yeah, that topic's kind of important to me, to be honest. So yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because one of the blogs I wrote a few years ago it's called something like Karim and the bus stop method. I don't know. I mean, because in English schools, the bus stop is the way they describe long division, where you put the number outside
Yeah.
horizontally, you divide along the top. And it was about a student who was 16, so he was in a college doing sort of the maths sort of resit after he'd failed it the year before, and he was doing this bus stop method, and he divided something like seven into, and it basically the answer should have been something like it's seven into 8,000 or something. And it should have
Mm,
been 1,000 and some, but he got
okay.
he totally stuffed up the carrying in the side, and so he'd got an answer of something like 100. And I
Yeah,
asked him
yeah.
whether he thought that was wrong, and he couldn't see anything wrong, like
Oh,
visually.
sure.
So his
Yeah.
his number sense was a kind of, he didn't go, oh, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem right. That's a bit small. He just did it procedurally, made a mistake, and then he couldn't tell. And so
So,
my feeling is that the sort of thing where people are referring to when they worry that knowing algorithms, I don't know, there's a kind of need for some number sense as well. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm
of
not
course.
justifying it. I'm just giving you an
Yeah, no,
example.
no, no. You are, yes, you are correct. But is that the fault of the algorithm? How could it be, right? It's an algorithm. Like, how can an algorithm be blamed on something like that, right? It's you have to teach children and you have to tell them, now think about that. Does that make sense? Like, does that make sense? Like, that's your job as a teacher to give that feedback. And the other thing is, like, when people are new at learning things, they make mistakes like that. They don't think, right? Like, I'm
Yeah,
constantly at, like, I teach at the university level. There are things that are like so obvious to me. And, I'll stop, and my students, they'll just make these ridiculous errors. And I would never say that to them or blame it on an algorithm they're using, but I would say, okay, let's just think about that for a second. Like, does
mm,
that make sense? Does it make sense that, you multiplied those exponents there when this is what that actually means? So I think there's some issues with mistaking the algorithm being to blame for it, or maybe not good teaching, or maybe just novice learners not getting enough practice and feedback.
yeah. And so is it, I mean, just to finish off, and then I get Emma to jump in. Is the thinking this, that through using algorithms repeatedly, um, you develop a kind of fluency with it, obviously with some feedback loops if they make errors. And so you then have a procedural tool which you can use, and then through that your number sense kind of emerges because you can manipulate numbers with some confidence, and then you can the kind of the a bigger picture understanding emerges out of that. Is that the thinking?
Yeah, now you're speaking my language.
Okay,
You
okay,
got it. Exactly.
okay.
The more practice you get with something, the better you get at it, and the more you can start looking for patterns and thinking about what's behind the algorithm that you're using. Absolutely.
What's your sense of this, Emma?
This is kind of right up my street because when I when I worked a lot in maths education a while ago, it was never this algorithm is right or this expanded algorithm is wrong or this method is right, this method is wrong. And I was listening really carefully to when you explained that 35 had 56, Anna, because you did it exactly, obviously, exactly how you'd wanted it when you said there's five ones and six ones, which makes 11, which is a 10 and a 1. And so we carry the 10, and then there's a 30 and a 50 and another 10. Where that algorithm goes wrong is where that specificity of language is not as tight. So people are saying there's a 5 and a 6, which is 11, carry the 1. And the child goes, well, hang on, it's not a 1, it's a 10. And then the teacher says, add the 3 and the 5 and the 1. And it's not a 3, a 5 and a 1, it's a 30 and a 50 and a 10. So but it's, unless you align that real specificity of place value language, then the number sense can get lost. And we used to introduce this years ago, around about year three. So children would be about 7 and they just got a handle on all the place value, hundreds, tens, ones. And then this teacher started labeling the tens column as add a 3 and a 5. And they're like, what? And the teacher needed to say, add three tens and five tens and the other 10 that we just carried over to make six tens, and that's why we write the, whatever it is there. So it's really interesting that a lot of people were then expanding the algorithms to try and get to circumvent that and to prevent that. And that's when it became, well, the compact algorithm is bad and the expanded one is good. When actually, if you'd got that specificity of language to start with, you probably wouldn't have needed to expand it in the first place. So I was listening really carefully to that. And then when Tom was talking about the bus stop method, I was thinking, yeah, again, we used to introduce that around about 8 years old. And it got known as the Gazinta method. And children were saying Gazinta, like if you're doing
It
43
goes into.
by 3, they'd be like,
Oh, that, okay.
3 Gazinta. And they genuinely thought that was one word. It was called the Gazinta method because they didn't actually understand the underpinning process and the sense of number that underpinned the algorithm. So everybody said, right, let's get around that, let's expand that. So it really fascinates me when you were talking about that because it just echoed with so much of what I've seen. Like, it's not the algorithm at fault, it's that real specificity of language. But one of the challenges is when you are a generalist in a primary setting, you don't necessarily have had that conversation around the need for that specificity of language. Is that something you've seen as well, Anna?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know what it's like in the UK. I do want to back up on something though that you said. And so I agree. I think it's really important that, when we introduce it, the algorithm, we explain it properly. Like, here's what we're doing. We're adding the ones, and this is why we carry or regroup or whatever you call it. But you want them to move past that. Like, you don't want them always thinking through it, right? That's economy of thought in mathematics. We need to be able to do some things quite quickly. You don't want to think about them. That's the whole point. We're always looking for efficiency and economy of thought so that we can do harder problems, right? But you kind of want that sort of at the beginning, you're the teacher, you should be explaining why it's true. I'm not saying the kids have to regurgitate it every time because I think it can be really hard for kids. And I think sometimes, it becomes more clear to them later. But the teacher should know why it's true and be able to explain it. So you asked me about elementary teachers and being generalists. So I can't speak for what it's like in the UK, but you can. But here in Canada, I would say a lot of elementary teachers really struggle with math, and some of them wouldn't know it well, and many of them wouldn't know why the algorithm works the way it does, and various other things. So that is definitely an issue, and that's where having a really good math program, like even a scripted program, I think is really a good idea, particularly for elementary school teachers.
Mm. And
Yeah,
it's
so in a sense, what you're saying is like in the early stages, like the whole thing of saying using the place value, you get past that. So, for example, if I was to do it, I wouldn't be thinking that. I'd just be going boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom, carry,
Yes.
whatever. And then I'm not. I don't need to think in place value because I have an intuition for it anyway,
Mm.
because I've got to develop that. But so you don't have to articulate it, but you do. Teachers will do that. I mean, and that makes sense to me. I'm just wondering why people are so firm fixed in that view then, and it links to these some other things. I mean, let's say like not learning number facts. So there's a whole other thing. I mean, like I
Yeah.
was talking to Bruno Reddy about this, who's the kind of architect of times tables rock stars, and I talked to him about this. Like, it really is about knowing them off by heart. It's not about visualizing them as an array or anything. It's just literally knowing them, like literally knowing them. So seven eighths is 56. I said, don't panic. Don't get it wrong in front of Anna Stokke. I was thinking like
It would be okay.
So anyway,
That's okay.
you just know it. You know it.
Yeah, you have to know
One
it.
of the things I'm curious about, that I used to teach maths, and you'd have this thing of like, you drill, you practice, and make it fun, and you'd learn them, and you'd learn your number facts. But then you get to a point where you'd say, what's 15 times 13? And the students would say, I don't know. And I'd say, well, no, now you need to work it out. Like, there comes a point where knowing isn't efficient. You have to be able to work it out.
Yeah, 100%.
So there's a kind of, and he said, so 12 by 12 is the kind of the highest they go, because beyond that,
Yeah.
it's not efficient. But So what's the evidence base? Is that been a study thing where people have tested that and shown that number facts, learning off by heart, is an efficient
Yeah.
thing?
Okay. So, I mean, I would look to the work of Amanda Vanderheyden and Brian Ponce and, Robin Cotting. So they've done a lot of work in that area. But there's definitely some evidence that the more fluent someone is at something like number facts, and by fluency, I mean A, accuracy, and B, being able to do it quickly and effortlessly, the more fluent someone is with number facts, the more likely they're going to be able to use those in a new setting, to be able to generalize that information. And there's lots of good reasons for that. The one that you probably would say yourself is cognitive load, right? So
Yeah.
when you're looking at an algebra problem and you don't know your number facts, like it's going to be really hard to do the algebra problem. How are you going to find a common denominator, right? How are
Mm.
you going to factor a polynomial if you don't know that 6 times 8 is 48 and 48 is the constant in the polynomial, right? Like that's going to be really, really hard to do. So, that's one of the reasons. And I kind of like the way Amanda Vanderheyden explained this. Like, if you have two kids, and say one kid is answering their math facts and it's taking them, I don't know, say they can answer 10 math facts correct in 1 minute, and you have another kid, and that kid can answer 40 math facts correct in 1 minute. And now they're learning a new skill that relies on those number facts. That other kid is way behind, right? So
Mm.
so the math facts are really important. Like as I always say, math is relentlessly hierarchical. It builds on everything else. It's like a ladder. And so if you're missing any rungs on that ladder and you're trying to learn something later on, it's going to be impossible. And number facts are like at the very bottom of the ladder. Like that, you just have to know them.
I had this exact same conversation. I was working with some initial teacher training colleagues the other day, and one of them said, "Why is it my children know 5 multiplied by 6, but they don't know 6 multiplied by 5?" And I was like, okay, well, they've obviously learned that as an independent fact. They've kind of just
Mhm.
learned it. They learned that that's a thing, that when you say 5 multiplied by 6, you say 30. And I ended up talking to my colleagues about how you would demonstrate that 5 multiplied by 6 gives you the same answer as 6 multiplied by 5. And one of them turned around and went, I wish somebody had taught me this at school.
Okay.
They hadn't for themselves made the connection about how you would demonstrate efficiency in learning your calculations and learning all the associative and commutative laws of multiplication at that same time. So I was like, yes, we need automaticity with the facts. Yes, we need those children to have them at their fingertips. But we also need to teach them how to be efficient when learning them, that actually there are other laws that underpin them. But it was really fascinating to think that again, in the kind of the teacher education part, those
Mm.
bits hadn't necessarily yet, and it was very early on in the year. They may well meet them later on, but at this point hadn't met them. And again, it was fascinating in that kind of hierarchical sense of how do we then teach those hierarchies to teachers to enable to teach those really well with their students.
Right. So again, I don't know why they wouldn't be using a program that would show, like, it's just a 5 by 6 array is the same as a six by
Yeah.
five. Like, you're going to have the same number in each, right? But I mean, you should be pointing it out to kids, though, that multiplication is commutative. So if you
Mhm.
know 5 times 6, you know 6 times 5, right? But once they've memorized them, what does it even matter, right? They know it's true,
Yeah.
right? So they
Yeah.
they know what they know what the answer is. So we don't need to even be thinking about that after that. But certainly I feel that the teachers should be able to explain that it's true.
Mm. And that fascinates me about teacher education, about pulling that thread
Yeah.
together, about
Oh yeah.
teaching how to teach that hierarchy. Um, I don't know what the answer to that is, because if I did, I'd be a millionaire.
It's
I suppose this is where I'm interested in the this because say something like that. So one of the things I'm fascinated by I've taught a lot of classes higher up in schools where the children are not succeeding in maths. So you're sort of dealing with a lot of fundamental misconceptions. So you've got a sort of class where a child would say, like a 14 or 15-year-old would say, a half is 0.2 as a decimal. Like just because they don't really get what decimals are, so they just think it's a two. So that kind of level of
Hmm.
guessing, and you're sort of
Yeah.
thinking, okay, so by now other children in the same school are doing complex algebra. These guys are not because they can't really, adding fractions and stuff is super hard for them and so on. So you're sort of dealing with older children who struggling with fundamentals, and so you're having to teach right from the beginning. So it's difficult because the program isn't really designed to. You're sort of always catching up, and things like the spatial. What I've found in my teaching was that the spatial awareness of children, their sense of number, the size of numbers, is really poor. So, you know, where is a quarter on a number line, and they just
Yeah.
really like a huge array of, and they don't really know what's bigger, a quarter or a fifth. They're thinking they have no real intuition for that. So, is there in your thinking with this algorithm first, or that and number facts thing? Where's the home for the sort of spatial awareness and kind of concrete resources and that kind of pictorial version of maths? Because I'm interested in where that fits, because that seems to me a missing piece for some students.
Well, you have to do that too, right? Like they should know how to place numbers on the real number line. So, like in our after school program, that's definitely part of something that the students do. That's one of the things they practice, right? So definitely there's a place for that. So I'm not saying get rid of that. I would think these days the amount that they focus on, or they're supposed to be focusing on pictorial things, I would think those things wouldn't be as much of a problem. But anything, like if it's a problem, it's because you didn't practice it enough, right? So you need
Yeah.
lots of practice with stuff like that too. But like I have students in university that also have very poor number sense. And I can tell you where that comes from. That comes from using a calculator since like grade 6,
Yeah.
right? So that's the first thing we do. It's, we have no calculator and no calculator policy in our calculus class. And that's pretty much true in any intro calc class across Canada. And I've checked with people in the US and it's pretty much true there too, right? So, and the students are kind of terrified at first because they'll punch in the most simple things into a calculator. You can't believe it, really. Because
Yeah.
if you have the calculator, you don't have to think. So, we take the calculators away and then they start thinking. Like I'll give them, techniques for simplifying a root. And they'll be like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Like that's actually pretty straightforward, right? And
Mm.
so I think, I don't know. Do you have a reliance on calculators there in the high
Yeah.
schools?
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
people reach for their calculators all the time. I mean, there was a time, I mean, it's sort of not there anymore, but there was a time when children were assessed in year nine, so a kind of year 14-year-olds on mental maths. It was one of the assessments for the SATs test, which were then also scrapped. And you had to practice teaching them mental maths. I used to love that. I
Yeah.
was
I
kind of
used
sad.
to love it because we used to do it
Yeah,
at 11 as well at the end of primary, and I absolutely loved it. And what fascinated me was when I worked for the numeracy strategy, but there was a big analysis of the children who went on to perform really well at GCSE, and it was those ones who, regardless of what they got on the written paper and the reasoning paper, it was the ones who had the strongest scores on the mental maths paper that then went on to do really well further down the line, which completely underpins this idea of knowing the most efficient method, having that idea of number sense, having those facts at your fingertips, knowing how to be mentally kind of flexible and agile with the knowledge that you have. Because the questions were timed. You got 5 second, 10 second, and 15 second questions. So there was no time to do long,
yeah.
convoluted
You had to
written.
sort of
Yeah,
do
yeah,
this
sure.
approximation methods, and so
Yeah.
so this is interesting. So in terms of this being a big debate, I mean, so there are people who then think the stuff is harmful, and even scrapping. Um, in Australia, this has been happening. Certain government people, saying we should stop testing children on times tables and things like that. And this idea is there's another thing which came up in the research shed was about the stress the anxiety associated with testing of number facts. But then I think it was Daniel Ansari, was that him, was like debunking that massively and saying the evidence around that is really poor. So it feels to me when it's studied and put to the test, these things are just easily debunked, but they're still very prevalent, aren't they? So how do we explain that?
Okay, so I'll just address the time test cause math anxiety myth, and that is a myth. So, and some of the people that really do a lot of research on that, for example, Robin Cotting, and I did a whole episode on exactly this topic. And that is another one where it all kind of goes back to one opinion piece that a high profile math education professor wrote. And I forget what it's called, but basically it essentially claims that research shows that time tests cause math anxiety. And if you trace it back in that paper, actually, there are no research articles that show that, right? So there's no evidence showing that. In fact, if you don't time students, how are you ever going to know if they're fluent? Like, how are you ever, like, how do you know if they're progressing, right? If they're meeting the expectations that you need them to meet. But what it actually is that causes math anxiety is poor instruction and not being good at math, right? That, like, who wants to do math if you can't do it and you feel terrible about it because you can't do it, right? So if we want to sort of cure math anxiety, we've got to use good instruction. And we have to do a good job of teaching students and make sure that they learn the methods and that in fact we are kind of testing them to make sure they're improving.
And the research seems to show that, even the kind of the anxiety. I remember, I remember this talk where it was explaining the different tests they had done to test for anxiety and whether or not, and how it was measured. And it's just not there. It's just you're looking for it and it's not there. It's a
Yeah.
funny. It's weird how that can someone influential can project that onto a whole system. So we don't want to
It's
test.
it's really interesting that and why? Like for what purpose? Okay.
Yeah.
I've thought a lot about that. And I mean, I have several conjectures on it, but some of them sound a bit conspiracy. So I won't tell you, but it's yeah, I mean, it just, I guess you could see it, right? Like you're being tested, you get nervous. And I think sometimes the issue is people could be tested when they don't know how to do things. And again, that's what's causing the stress because they don't know how to do it. And so when you do those kind of time tests with students on math facts and things like that, you actually want to make sure they're pretty accurate first. You want to be at the stage of what we call the instructional hierarchy, right? Where they've passed that accuracy stage pretty much, like they're accurate most of the time. And then you're just kind of building their speed, right? But yeah, it's interesting how so many people just sort of really do not like tests when
Well,
actually tests are meant to help you.
and if you make it that, I've seen some amazing lessons. So I was telling Bruno about this, about the timetables rock stars. I used to have it in my previous school, and this is just a buzz. The kids are just, and it's because you have to beat your own best, personal best.
Yeah.
It's not a competition. So you sort of the timer goes, and the kids are all going boom, 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 and there's a kind of like electricity, and they're seeing how far they can go before the time's up. And it's funny, like they're definitely enjoying themselves. It's just there's no question about it. And another lesson I remember this teacher saying it was like a grade 8 class. They said, "Shall we do a workout?" They'd done some other like modeling, like algebraic stuff, and they said, "Shall we do a workout? What should we do?" And they were like calling out, "Doubling, halving," like this. And so the teacher said, "Okay, let's do doubling," and he just went, "Okay, go," and he just read out like numbers getting increasing, and the kids had to double, 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 double,
Yeah.
double, and then like reveal the answers. And okay, how do we get on? He got 18 or more out of 20, and all going, whoa, 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 Mexican wave. It's like there's that kind of euphoria about maths. I just thought these kids are not experiencing anxiety. They're having the best time, and I love that. You should, because it was just a routine, something they could all do, and just having a workout at it. It's fantastic. So yeah, I think that's a good shout, that it's about not being able to do it is what
Yeah,
kind of.
it definitely is. And people need to understand that, when you can't do math, like when you'll hear people say that a lot, like, "Oh, I'm never good at math. I've never been good at math." That's almost never the case. It's that hierarchical nature of math. And what happened is somewhere along the ladder, you got left behind. And then it's really, really hard to get caught up after, right? So it's a matter of just teaching it well and trying to get everybody sort of on the mastery path to make sure that they can do the math that they're going to encounter later on.
And I guess that sits against the backdrop of a lot of adults still thinking it's okay to say, "Well, I can't do it. I'm bad at maths." The old thing about you don't go to the restaurant and say, "I can't read the menu," but it's perfectly okay to say, "Oh, I can't work out how to split the bill because I'm no good at maths." Um, it's a, it's kind of kicking against the fact that they potentially didn't have that really strong
Yeah.
instruction. Therefore, they're saying it's difficult, but then reinforcing with other people that it is okay to not understand it and making it some kind of mythical thing that's impossible for some people to understand, rather than it can be understood by all if it's done really well.
Yeah. I mean, and people talk about that a lot, and definitely I encounter that because when I tell someone I'm a math professor, they might tell me all sorts of things. Sometimes they'll tell me they love math. That's my favorite response. But lots of times they'll tell me they hate math and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, we can't change what parents say to their kids about that, right? We can't really change the culture. But we can change the way that we teach math. We can change the way that we teach math so that more people are successful. I know that. So that's really the answer is concentrating on what we can change. And that would be changing the way we teach math so that more kids are successful.
And
So
I
do you
love the
think,
way that Tom's badged it with that excitement, because I've seen so many teachers over my career say, "This is really hard, this is really difficult," and not in a challenging way, as in, "This is really hard, but we can do hard stuff. Come on, let's do it." But this is going to be really tricky. And you're thinking, please don't say that.
Yeah, I know. I know.
so I mean, I love the fact that on your YouTube, if you look up your YouTube channel, your videos are about things like eigenvalue proofs and things like that,
Oh,
which are,
that's for my okay, so that's my I have two YouTube accounts. Sorry. You're on the wrong one. You don't want to go on that account. That's
well,
for
no,
my
I love
students.
it. I love it. It's great.
Okay, so I have another account for my podcast. That's probably on that one you'll find other things. Like for instance, I just posted a YouTube short yesterday that myth time tests cause math anxiety.
Yeah.
Exactly what we're talking about. And it was from Ben Solomon who I was talking about who I just talked to on my podcast.
So you've got your chalk and talk, which is brilliant, and then, the reason I wanted to just reference that because this sort of after school class that you do, where you're so is that kind of is that like your kind of I don't know, like your testing ground for some of the ideas? Because that's where you see the maths learning take shape, and then you're sort of seeing how that progresses. Do you find that sort of dealing with students at both ends sort of interesting to come to see the trajectory?
I do. I consider it community service. Just it's volunteer work that I do in the community to use my skills to help people. But the way it actually started was we actually started a math club when our daughter was young, and the kids would come to our house and we'd do math with them. But then many more kids wanted into the math club and we just couldn't do it. So we just like I talked to, some other people in the community that have been involved in the nonprofit world, and we just started a nonprofit and then we just opened it up. And we hire university students and they're getting good training too. So I view it as helping would-be teachers as well, because most of the students who teach in our program are becoming teachers. But
Mm.
yeah, I guess you could say we test stuff. We use jump math for the most part. And then we have a lot of enrichment problems that we created. And our kids can also write the math league contest. So if they're bored in school, they get enrichment and they get an opportunity to write a math contest.
Wow. And is this part of your kind of advocacy work? Because you said at the beginning today today that you do lots of advocacy.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What is a maths advocate?
Oh, I've done lots of stuff. So I've done a lot of media interviews. So for instance, after I get off the call with you, I'm going to go do a media interview about math scores in BC. Okay. So, and I do this all the time. So I've probably done about, I don't know, 200 or 300 at this point. So I do lots of TV interviews, or I'll do radio, or I write op-eds, just advocating for the things that we're talking about today. And let's see, I've written a policy report. I actually have another one that's under review right now. So you heard it first here, and hopefully it'll pass the review, because it's about fixing math in Canada. And like I said, I founded an advocacy group, and I've also advocated for better teacher training in math, which is, unfortunately, it's been successful at times, but mostly not that successful. So yeah, those are the kinds of things I do.
I mean, I found it fascinating going to Canada to hear this debate, because I feel like I don't know if we're in quite the same place in England, because many we have, national curriculum doesn't, I don't know, it just takes people in a certain direction. But one of the debates I think interesting, and I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I've seen you say something about we don't want the equivalent of the blended approach to reading, like phonics plus applied to maths. Because some people will be listening to this and they'll say, surely it's a bit of both, a bit of kind of real world maths and a bit of learning and number facts, and that's just common sense. But what's your view of that? Like this idea that it's a bit of a mush and we do a bit of both.
It depends on what you're talking about.
Mm.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, for me, it's about content. Like, are students going to learn the content that they need to learn to have a lot of opportunities available to them? So, and what that would mean mostly is, like, are the elementary school students, are they prepared to do algebra, right? Because algebra is the gateway to higher level math. But I'll say what I always say about this balance idea. Compromise is generally about adults. It's about adults trying to get along. And it should really be about what's best for students and what is going to maximize their opportunities and ensure that they're going to learn math. So if you have one approach that is most likely going to get you to that spot, which tends to be explicit instruction, right? And there's lots of evidence backing that up. You have another approach, and that's the constructivist approach, where you're going to start with the problem and then the kid's just going to struggle through that. You're going to take the one that works. That doesn't mean you're never going to do problem solving. It's a question of when you do it, right? Explicit instruction would build them up to the spot where they can solve those tough problems. So, I mean, balance depends on what you're talking about, whether it's good or not, right?
It just sounds it just sounds like a fudge. So this whole thing of problem solving and real world maths. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not like you never do it, but you're right. You have to be able to do it. I mean, it's kind of painful. I've seen these lessons where children are sort of working out, theorems, for, and I have seen some lessons where it's worked, but only at a very high level. So I've seen some
Yeah,
students
sure.
like do quite a complicated thing with hyperbolic sine and cosine functions, and to generalizing the expansion into sine and cos and stuff. And I was thinking, whoa, okay. And they could, because they knew how to sort of
Yeah.
find a pattern, and then the language was rich to them. But when you're seeing children do it with things like shape and space, and I think, well, why don't you just tell them, show them the lines of symmetry so they can recognize them, rather than making them guess and sort of fumble. There's that type of thing. But a lot of teachers' instincts is to just say, so what do you think it is? What do you think the next step might be? And you think,
Mm.
oh, come on, not too early. Tell them first, show them.
Yeah,
And I'm begging for that to happen, but it's quite a strong instinct for teachers to just constantly ask rather than tell.
I
Do you see that?
see.
Do you see that?
Okay.
Do you see that in lessons? I mean, do you go into classes and watch that?
I don't know. I guess, well, that is the standard approach in Canada, right? So the most common approach used right now in Canada is called building thinking classrooms. Have you ever heard of it?
I have in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
because it's Canadian.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's moved around. So the idea behind this is that, students are in groups on vertical, non-permanent surfaces. They have to be non-permanent. I have no idea why. It's something about, mistakes are not permanent, right? So anyway, they're in groups on whiteboards and they work through problems, right? Like that's the most common approach used here in elementary and high school. So I would say that's just the prevalent way of doing things. I don't think all teachers like it because I know they don't because I hear from them all the time about wanting to use other methods or some schools do use things like jump math and that sort of thing. But I always say you can kind of see what's going on by looking at the professional development that's offered. You just look around and see what professional development's offered. It's mostly not you, Tom. I mean, maybe,
No.
maybe, maybe at some places, but normally not, right?
That's so interesting. I mean, I spoke to I probably won't name and shame or because of it's a sort of political thing that I visited a district in Manitoba, and they were saying that in one of the schools where they introduced sort of direct instruction for maths, and the results were significantly higher than other areas. And the teachers, though, in some of the schools, even though they were seeing the results using those methods, still would say they preferred the other methods. Like
Why?
because they liked this feeling of the students talking and being around the whiteboards and all of that. Even the
Ah,
evidence in their eyes, like no, but when you tell them and they show them, look, they perform better when you assess them. They know more maths when you teach it to them directly. But they would still say, "Yeah, I know, I see that, but I still preferred it the old way." And it's like, wow. So the
that's
superintendent was saying,
strange.
it's like this is what we're up against. Like you're up against such an embedded sort of value system. It sort of transcends logic. It's not even rational anymore.
So
So
it feels good.
it feels good. Yeah, it feels good. It's the feels. It's like, oh look, oh look at the buzz of the children talking.
Yes.
And
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
kind of a dominant paradigm for a lot of people. Like that's the kind of measure of a successful learning episode is the children having that experience.
I think that's why people like that method because it is like that. Everybody's in groups, they're all up around the board. It feels like everybody's involved, but they're actually not all involved, right?
Yeah.
Like there's going to be kids in that group who are too quiet to say anything. There's going to be kids in that group who are, doing all the work, and other kids are just kind of sitting there, right? Like it's
Yeah.
it's kind of doomed for failure in some sense. Like it seems fairly obvious to me, but you're right. I mean, we're up against a lot. I mean, if that's like I would think when someone sees the data that should be enough for them to say, "Oh, I prefer the direct instruction method." You know?
Yeah.
So I find that surprising.
I-
Sad.
I'm I'm just thinking back to when I first started teaching in '98. It was the first year that the national numeracy strategy was brought in over here in England. And there was that big sea change across the profession. Everybody had to use this document, teach in this particular way, use this particular lesson structure. You start with a mental oral starter, you do some direct instruction, the children go off and practice, then you come back and do some kind of conclusion plenary at the end. For a lot of people, that felt really alien because they'd been teaching in a certain way for a very long time, be it group work or discovery learning, inquiry learning. Some people were doing some kind of form of instruction, but it wasn't universal. And I just remember the kickback from, and I came into it as a strategy baby because I didn't know anything better. It was my first year of
Yeah.
teaching. I just got on with the program. But I just remember the absolute, not want to change the practice, even in the face of this. This is working really, really
Okay.
well. And it took so long for people to embrace a new way of working and not abandon everything they'd done before, but refine and leave behind and move on. What's really interesting was obviously the strategy itself wasn't a panacea, it wasn't perfect. And
Mhm.
those people who learnt with that one, now it's been refined and moved on even more, are still now reluctant to let go of that one. So it's almost like it's always going to be really difficult to move practice forward when people have got a method or an approach that they feel comfortable with or were
That's
born,
true.
were born into, inducted into, and then being asked to kind of abandon at worst or at best refine, rethink, evaluate, move on. So it's as you were talking, I was reliving the late 90s there, Anna.
Really?
Wow, you,
Kind of practice
So,
it, move towards instruction.
so Tom, I'm curious though, if I can just ask you a question. So what do you do when you have teachers like that? So even in the face of evidence, they prefer the old method. Like, how do you convince them?
I think I feel you need. I always think this about all teacher development. I've learned this over the years that you have to deal with the people as they are. You have to just say, okay, I understand what you're saying, and I get your perspective, but we have to try to. You have to sort of unpick where they're coming from, and you say that so what you're valuing is this. It's not the maths outcomes, because look, you have to just say. But one of the things you're perhaps mistaking is when you do the instructional teaching that it's sort of one directional. It isn't. It's highly interactive, and you have to sort of celebrate the fact that that's happening, and also sort of highlights things like you said about the group work. So look at a lesson. Like sometimes I've done this with the head of department. Look at the lesson. Look at that lesson. Listen to what they're saying. Watch those kids over there. Look, that child is doing all the talking. Can you see that? Like those two are not doing any talking. So when you think it's happening, it's not. So you can have these illusions. So let's be really hard on ourselves and try to. Sometimes you have to pick out a specific instance to say, in that instance, that child did no thinking at all, and that's masked by this. You have to sort of be more forensic about it and sort of show evidence of faults and just chip away. And I think that's the only thing to do. And
Yeah.
also, I think sometimes providing a curriculum shift. And one of the things I've been talking about with a few maths people recently is how technical a really highly designed program is in terms of sequencing and the whole thing of variation theory. I think it's very
Mm.
technical. And the average teacher is so new to them, they wouldn't. I say the average, like someone like me. I mean, if I've teach maths, but I would need someone to show me what a fully sequenced curriculum could be, and then I'd understand it, but I wouldn't be able to make it. I'd want someone sort of who knew more about it to like model
Right.
it. And I feel like that type of showing what can be done and make it feel engaging. You have to sort of anyway. I don't. I think it's a hard battle to win. It's hard when it's sort of
I think
institutional.
so too. But
Mhm.
also, I mean, couldn't you just like if you really want to use that method with the groups and all that, couldn't that be like fun Friday, like just like you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
not it why does it have to be the main
I know.
part of the
I agree.
right? Like if you used a really good instructional technique, think of how much more your kids are going to accomplish, right?
Oh,
And then you'll have
exactly.
this extra time. So on Fun Friday, you can use the method that
You know,
doesn't really work.
I think
And
this
then,
has come up on
yeah,
our podcast before. This like a pet peeve that we have of teachers saying, here's a problem. You just choose whatever method you want. Just whatever method works best for you. They say things like that. You think
yeah,
they are 9 years old. They have
yeah,
no idea what works
no,
best for them, and you're giving them way too much credit for this sort of kind of like agency. They haven't developed the agency yet. So kind of it's anyway. Well, look, I mean, I think it's a fascinating debate, and I think it's something we should come back to. And just we're gonna have to wrap up. Where our producer Luke is winking at us, saying like "time's up." So I honestly, whenever it's maths, and we're like go on forever because we both taught maths. So let's Anna, what's your next thing? And if people want to look out for more things that you're doing, you mentioned this paper, but
oh,
where can people find out more about what you're up to or follow
well,
you?
you could just go to my website, annastokke.com. It's Stokke. And everything's there. I'm actually going to be doing some things with La Trobe University in Australia. So for instance, I'm co-delivering a masterclass in October on evidence-informed math teaching, and that's open to anyone in the world. So it's on October 20th in Australia, and it's October 19th where I live. So, it's going to be kind of late for me, but it's hard to work that time change. But yeah, so I'm excited about that, and lots of fun stuff coming up on my podcast. I have to get you on at some point too. So yeah, definitely. And so keep an eye out. Lots of, just lots more math and advocating for better math instruction. That's what I do.
Brilliant. And I tell you, people listening, you should check out Anna's podcast, Chalk and Talk, because she's a pro. She makes me feel like a total amateur. She's very good at this. And I'd love to come and talk on your podcast. You can show me how it's done.
Definitely.
I'm busy putting that date in my diary, Anna. It's pretty rare that we've interviewed somebody I've actually thought, right, I need to get that in my diary. So hopefully I can dial in for that one. I don't want to miss that. Thank you.
Okay, well, we better wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Anna. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
No, it's a real pleasure. And thank you to everyone listening. We're getting up and running with our series. We've got Dan Willingham coming up next, and the whole host of fantastic guests. So thank you so much for listening to Mind the Gap, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner, and I've been presenting with my co-host Tom Sherrington. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review, share on social media, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel, search for Mind the Gap with Tom and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership, and our producer for today's episode was Luke Kemper.